Thank you, Club of Rome, Dr. Khosla, for inviting me to talk to this very distinguished gathering. I'm very glad to be here. And the topic is energy, which is the major driver of human societies and is critical for ensuring that all other critical necessities of human life are also secured. I would like to list them just in the context of the village situation that I'm going to be focusing on. And I'll list them as income and jobs, food from sustainable agriculture, nutrition, health, education, housing, sanitation, drinking water, electricity, clean cooking, and mobility. These are the areas which every man, woman, and a child has the right to have in a fair and just society. Only a comprehensive national development policy and integrated implementation program can ensure such a situation. 70 years after independence, we have not reached that state. My focus today is going to be on our villages. The challenge for us is to provide the security of power and energy services which can drive rural development. I am a firm believer that you need electricity to start the development process in a village. The carrying capacity of the natural land and other inputs in the village is not enough to provide the basic minimum necessities of every Indian. The goals, therefore, are that equitable solutions for all Indians contribute to limiting the rise of global temperature, about which we have heard today several times. Whether it's going to be 1.5 degrees or 2.5 degrees, nobody knows today. Within the next 30 years, we do not have much time from the climate side of more than perhaps 30 years if we want to limit it to 2.5 degrees. Thirdly, for us, is also very important to minimize the dependence on external sources of primary energy, technologies, critical raw materials, and funds. So let's look at the first. We are not only far removed from our goal, but let's look at this situation here. This is a recent book by an economist called Piketty, and it shows the differences in the 50% of the population and the top 1% of Indians. It's based on Indian data, and the bottom 50%, who started off with about 20% share of the national income, is today down to less than 15%, and the top 1% to which we belong have gone from a bottom of, it reached a bottom of about 7% in 80, now it's up to 22%. So this is the type of inequality which persists not only in income, it persists in all the other 10 necessities that I have described earlier as the necessities of life. We have also to remember that a large part of urban poverty is exported from rural poverty. It's our immigrants who come here to earn enough to be able to feed their families in the villages who are also contributing to a large part of the urban problem. So, at this stage, after decades of lopsided development, solutions and policies have now to change. And the village situation can have the maximum impact on the national situation on the whole. I'll just explain that in a minute. But basically, the situation today is that if we consider that the Indian glass as a whole is half full, because we consider ourselves to be the 5th largest industrial nation or whatever, the village glass is practically empty. And that is the situation that we really have to address. So what can we do to change things in a short period of 20 years? For me, the first most important thing that we have to do is to have two differentiated and equitable policy for the centralized and decentralized sectors. The same policies for the centralized sectors are not applicable today for changing the lives of the villagers. So we need a policy for the urban, industrial, infrastructure, and sectors, and another one for the rural sector. The new policies and solutions in the rural sector can be completely CO2 neutral or very low CO2 impact. And the impact of that would be that if we do the mixing of the centralized and decentralized sector in an optimized manner, the overall CO2 reduction goals of our nation can be reached in a much simpler manner, because the centralized sector is going to have a much higher CO2 level. Since I personally come from the centralized sector, I have built very large, very efficient power stations for 50 years. So I would like to say just a few words about the policies we need in the centralized sector to be able to reduce the CO2 intensity of our system, which is today dependent to 70% or more on coal firing. Centralized sector cannot afford to keep the coal in the ground. That is the slogan today in the West. And the banks and the financial sectors are now beginning not to invest in the coal sector. The coal sector has to reduce the quantity of coal that it burns over a period of time. The government today is focusing on centralized ultra-super thermal power stations as the means of reducing the CO2 content of the centralized sector. Apart, of course, I'll come to the renewables and so on. That is not enough. The best possible centralized supercritical, ultra-critical plant in the optimum condition of a cold climate can bring you 10 to 12 to 15% reduction of CO2. In our condition, I have just looked at the data for the 600 megawatt super thermal plant, and it brings us a reduction of 6%. That's not enough. So the main way in which we have to do is to look at increasing the efficiencies of coal utilization. That cannot be done by a pure condensing route. So the mix of a pure condensing plant with supercritical power station and a larger number of large decentralized 60 to 100 megawatt power stations, which are either cogeneration or trigeneration, which is an established technology which doesn't have to be invented again, will reduce the CO2 emission of these plants by a value of minimum 50%. And it's economic, and it's financeable, and it is something that we are completely ignoring in our country. These plants today, if you look, we have 30% of our present coal-fired power stations are due for retirement. Their average efficiencies are not even in the, up to 35%. Retiring them, the best way would be to convert them into cogeneration plants, because they are in places where you have the infrastructure, the coal linkage is established, and you can choose the locations where you set up what we call an integrated energy grid. An energy grid is electricity, piped hot water, steam, and process energy, piped cooling energy for processes and comfort. There are hundreds of plants of this type running around the world. Not all of the 30% will be suitable for this, but we have to do an in-depth analysis, and all those which are capable should be converted within 5 years. 30% of our present capacity can become low CO2 coal-fired power stations. The other advantage of this is that these are the coal-fired power stations, and I was very happy to hear from you the way we are neglecting solar thermal in this country. The ideal way for us to move forward is to go to hybridization. We can reduce the coal consumption in thermal power station and replace them by biomass and by solar thermal, both of which can be integrated without too much of an effort. They can be retrofitted, and they can be added on to such a cogeneration system. The present focus on PV and wind are very welcome, no question about it, but they're not adequate. And I have no idea why there's so little emphasis on higher applications of biomass power stations, biomass energy systems, and solar thermal. This is something that is a major lacuna in our policy, which should be corrected. The smart grids we are talking about, you have heard about the smart grids, but they are moving at a pace. I just cannot imagine that a country which is struggling with the problem of 30% of excess power, so-called, in this country, doesn't have a network that can use that power and supply it to those who don't have it. And of course, there is no way that you can avoid clean coal transportation. Those of you who have read the recent report in Indian Express about what happens from the coal mines till the coal reaches the power station, it creates its own havoc along the way. So I come back now again to rural sector, where electricity supply and energy services are still scarce, and development needs are enormous. Decentralized generation with microgrids linked to the local value addition, local energy services are the most effective and fastest devices for the sustainable rural development. The centralized sector, as I said, is best served by the centralized grid, and the decentralized sectors will be served by the decentralized rural energy-based power stations. The problem of linking these in a 10 or 20 years framework to the centralized grid is really not a problem. In Switzerland, where I live, we used to have 500 local generators of plants. They have now come down in number. But they are all managed, and they are linked to very large hydro and nuclear power stations, and they are completely manageable, especially if we have smart grids. I would like to show you a few slides, just to show that what I'm talking about, rural development driven by renewable energy, is not fiction. It's running in 20 villages, and it's covering at least 3,000 families. When there were the heavy floods in August in Bihar, ours were the only electricity generators in this whole district which supplied electricity and drinking water to the villagers. How do I go to a... here it is. So this is a microgrid, which is based on now, we have started with biomass gasification. That's the plant, second plant with the green dough. And now it's a hybrid, because biomass has its own problems of biomass management. And the major role that a microgrid has is to supply reliable electricity. People pay you extra money because you guarantee them electricity. So, which means that also neither PV by itself nor biomass by itself can guarantee electricity 365 days in the year. So we are very successfully running hybrid plants, which includes biomass, biogas, and PV in the village context. They are the best. There are battery banks, there are agro-processing, there is diesel replacement, pumping in the field, large pumps which supply water at the right time to the farmers, and all these activities are run by the villagers. Villagers trained in our own village training centers, women and men who run these plants. This is what we call tiny grids. Microgrids we have, they are in the range of maybe 20 to 30 kilowatt. Tiny grids are in the range of half a kilowatt to 2 kilowatt, 3 kilowatt. And they are very specific to a number of, it's like a captive power station. 20 families, 2 pumps, a few productive activities, and they are assured. They run it themselves, they are in charge of it. Reliability is not. We provide them with training, and we provide the O&M services. So I will show you the next photograph, and these are the people who run these plants. These are the landless laborers who today have jobs in the villages, and this is a plant where we produce local fertilizer, supply water, and cooking energy by processing the biomass as pellets in energy-efficient stoves. So you actually are creating a total enterprise culture in the village, which is sustainable and low CO2. This is what it's all about. A village needs a completely integrated approach. In our system, we talk of bottom-up and holistic planning, and a village will consist of all these supplies and services, which will be provided by small entrepreneurs, a number of them. Somebody takes responsibility for the power, and so on and so on. And we have at the moment 10 such plants are planned, what we call, using a very fashionable jargon, sustainable, smart rural development integrated manner. I think that's it. Thank you very much.